Hybe built one of the most valuable entertainment empires in K-pop history. But here's what most people don't talk about. While the label was busy managing schedules, producing albums, and running a publicly traded company, 7 of its biggest stars were quietly building something else entirely. Not just endorsement deals. Not just brand ambassadorships. We're talking about equity stakes, creative partnerships, and business relationships so deeply structured that some of these members have more skin in the game than a typical celebrity ever would. These aren't the usual face-of-the-brand arrangements where a star smiles in a commercial and cashes a check. Some of these deals came with board-level access, product co-development rights, and revenue structures that would make any MBA student take notes. And in at least one case, the brand itself changed its entire global strategy because of who signed on. So the real question isn't whether BTS members are good at picking brands. The question is, when did they stop being the product and start being the investor? 7 members, 7 brands. And the story behind each one is more calculated than you'd expect. Let's start at number 10. Number 7. The luxury rookie. Jin times Valentino. Kim Seokjin, better known as Jin, has one of the most unusual timelines in the entire BTS story. He was the first member to enlist in the South Korean military, entering active duty in December 2022 as a frontline infantry soldier at the 5th Infantry Division. He completed his service and was discharged in June 2024, returning to a world that had shifted significantly in the nearly 2 years he was gone. Solo careers had launched, world tours had been announced, and the fashion industry, which had been quietly watching BTS members align with major luxury houses one by one, had its own plans waiting for Jin the moment he stepped back into civilian life. Valentino's move to sign Jin as a global ambassador in 2024 was not a random post-military welcome gift. It was a calculated positioning decision by a house that had been restructuring its brand identity under creative direction that leaned harder into a younger, more globally diverse audience. Valentino, founded in Rome in 1960 by Valentino Garavani, built its legacy on Italian couture craftsmanship and old-world glamour. But by the mid-2020s, the house was navigating the same challenge every heritage luxury brand faces. How do you stay relevant to a generation that consumes fashion through short-form video and parasocial relationships with artists, not through runway coverage in print magazines? Jin's profile answered that question precisely. His return from military service was one of the most tracked celebrity comebacks in South Korean entertainment history. His discharge alone generated international media coverage, trending on social platforms across Asia, North America, and Europe simultaneously. That kind of organic cultural moment is something no advertising budget can manufacture. What makes the Valentino partnership structurally interesting is its timing relative to Jin's solo career relaunch. His single, Running Wild, released in 2024, debuted at number 12 on the Billboard Hot 100, making him the first BTS member to chart as a solo artist after completing mandatory military service. That chart position wasn't just a personal milestone, it was a signal to every brand watching that Jin's individual commercial pull was intact and arguably stronger than before, amplified by the narrative weight of a soldier returning to the stage. Valentino positioned Jin not just in campaign imagery, but in front-row placement at its runway shows, a strategic visibility move that puts an ambassador in direct contact with the global fashion press and the social media ecosystem that surrounds Fashion Week. Front-row placement at a major couture house isn't decorative. It's a deliberate signal about who the brand considers its primary cultural spokesperson. For a house like Valentino, that seat carries real brand equity. Jin's personal style also aligns with what Valentino has been pushing: structured silhouettes, bold color choices, and a willingness to wear pieces that demand attention without relying on logo saturation. He's publicly spoken about his interest in fashion as a form of self-expression rather than obligation, which gives the partnership a layer of authenticity that purely transactional deals rarely produce. The story of Jin and Valentino is ultimately a story about timing a brand that needed a fresh cultural anchor and a member who came back from one of the most grounding experiences a person can have, carrying a kind of weight that translates directly into presence. And presence, in luxury fashion, is everything. Number 6 is where things get athletic and a lot more complicated. Number 6, the comeback contract, Suga times Puma. Min Yoongi, known professionally as Suga, and in his solo work as August D, has one of the most documented personal histories in BTS. He grew up in Daegu, South Korea, in a household that was not financially comfortable. As a teenager, he worked part-time delivery jobs on a motorcycle to fund his passion for music, and during one of those shifts, he was involved in a traffic accident that left him with a shoulder injury that would follow him for years. He eventually underwent surgery for that injury in 2023, a procedure that forced him to step back from performing at a critical moment in his career. The recovery was long, the timeline uncertain, and the industry watched closely. He enlisted for his mandatory military service in September 2023, assigned to social service duty due to his shoulder condition. He was discharged in June 2025. Through all of that, the injury, the surgery, the service, Puma stayed. That loyalty is the most underreported part of this entire partnership. Suga's relationship with Puma dates back to 2018 when BTS signed a group endorsement deal with the German sportswear brand. But what evolved from that initial group arrangement into Suga's individual ambassador role tells you something about how brand relationships mature when they're built on genuine alignment rather than pure transaction. Puma, founded in Herzogenaurach, Germany in 1948 by Rudolf Dassler, whose brother Adolf founded Adidas, has always positioned itself in the space between athletic performance and street culture. It's not trying to be Nike, it's not trying to be Adidas. Puma carved its identity in the intersection of sport, music, and youth culture, and that positioning made BTS a logical fit when the partnership first formed. But Suga specifically brought something to Puma that the broader group deal couldn't fully capture. His solo identity as August D is rooted in hip-hop, real, lyrically dense, emotionally raw hip-hop. His mixtapes addressed depression, social pressure, the psychological cost of fame, and the specific anxiety of growing up poor and ambitious in South Korea. That content resonated with an audience that values authenticity above almost everything else, and that audience overlaps significantly with the street culture consumer that Puma has always been trying to reach. His 2023 solo world tour, the August D Tour, was the first ever solo world tour by a BTS member. It sold out arenas across North America, Asia, and beyond, running for months before his shoulder required the surgical intervention that ultimately paused everything. The tour demonstrated commercial pull at a scale that most solo artists never approach, and it reinforced his individual brand value independent of the BTS group identity. Puma's decision to maintain and deepen the individual relationship with Suga through his surgery and military service is a statement about long-term brand strategy over short-term marketing cycles. Most endorsement deals are built around visibility. If a celebrity isn't actively promoting, touring, or generating media moments, the contract often goes quiet or gets restructured. Puma didn't do that. The brand's continued association with Suga through his least visible professional period signals a level of institutional commitment that is genuinely rare in celebrity partnership structures. His aesthetic also fits the Puma visual language in a way that feels uncontrived. He gravitates toward monochrome palettes, clean lines, and understated silhouettes, a style that photographs well against Puma's product design without requiring the kind of maximalist styling that can make athlete endorsements look costume-like. The partnership works because it doesn't look like it's working too hard. What comes next is a different category of luxury entirely, and a partnership that redefined what a K-pop artist could mean to a French fashion house. Number 5. The Vuitton Variable. J-Hope times Louis Vuitton. Jung Hoseok, known as J-Hope, holds a specific distinction within BTS that often gets buried under the group's collective narrative. He is the member most formally trained in dance before BTS existed. He trained at an art school in Gwangju, South Korea, competing in street dance competitions as a teenager before being recruited by Big Hit Entertainment. Dance wasn't a skill he developed inside the idol training system, it was his identity, before the system found him. That foundation matters when you try to understand why Louis Vuitton, the most valuable luxury brand on the planet by multiple financial metrics, chose him specifically as a global ambassador in 2023. Louis Vuitton doesn't make ambassador decisions casually. The house, founded in Paris in 1854, generates more annual revenue than most luxury conglomerates combined. Its parent company, LVMH, is the largest luxury group in the world by market capitalization. When a brand at that scale assigns the title of global ambassador to an individual, it is making a statement about who they believe carries the cultural weight necessary to represent 170 years of brand equity to a new generation of consumers. J-Hope was announced as a Louis Vuitton Global Ambassador in January 2023, becoming the second BTS member to hold an individual ambassadorship with a major LVMH house following V's relationship with Celine, which falls later in this list. But the timing of J-Hope's announcement carried specific context that made it more than a standard luxury signing. He had just completed his solo album Jack in the Box, released in July 2022, which debuted at number 17 on the Billboard 200. The album was a deliberate creative departure, darker, more experimental, rooted in alternative and punk influences rather than the polished pop architecture that defined BTS's commercial output. It was a statement of artistic independence, and it landed with both critics and fans in a way that reframed how the industry understood his range. Louis Vuitton's ambassador announcement came roughly 6 months after that album, a timeline that suggests the brand was watching how the solo project performed before finalizing the deal. That's not coincidence, that's due diligence. What J-Hope brought to Louis Vuitton beyond his individual fanbase was a specific kind of physical credibility. Fashion at the highest level is inseparable from movement. How clothes behave on a body in motion. How a silhouette reads when it's being worn by someone who understands their body with professional precision. J-Hope's dance background gives him a physical awareness that most celebrities simply don't have, and it shows in campaign imagery and runway attendance in ways that are subtle but perceptible to anyone who works in fashion professionally. He attended the Louis Vuitton Men's Fall-Winter 2023 show in Paris, sitting front row and generating media coverage that extended well beyond fashion press into general entertainment and music journalism globally. His presence at Fashion Week wasn't just attendance, it was an event within the event. Louis Vuitton's menswear had been undergoing a significant creative transition following the death of Virgil Abloh in November 2021. Abloh, who had served as artistic director of Louis Vuitton menswear since 2018, had fundamentally repositioned the line toward a younger, more culturally fluid audience that moved between streetwear, fine art, and luxury without treating them as separate categories. His passing left a creative vacuum that the house needed to fill while maintaining the cultural momentum he had built. J-Hope's ambassadorship came during that transitional period, providing cultural continuity to an audience that Abloh had spent years cultivating. For a brand navigating one of the most significant creative transitions in its recent history, having an ambassador with genuine credibility in music, dance, and youth culture was not decorative, it was load-bearing. The next member on this list took a different path, entirely quieter, more intellectual, and paired with a brand that most people outside the fashion world had never heard of before the partnership made headlines. Number 4. The Quiet Flex, RM times Bottega Veneta. Kim Namjoon, known as RM, the leader of BTS, is the member who taught himself English by watching the American sitcom Friends repeatedly until he could hold conversations fluently. That detail gets repeated so often, it has become almost mythological. But what it actually reveals is something more specific and more useful. He is someone who builds competence through sustained, self-directed immersion. That same approach appears in everything he does outside of music. He visits art museums wherever BTS travels, not for photo opportunities, but as a documented personal practice. He has spoken in interviews about specific works, specific artists, specific curatorial decisions that moved him. He donated to Korean cultural institutions. He co-produced tracks, wrote lyrics in Korean that literary critics took seriously, and built a public intellectual identity that is genuinely unusual in the idol industry. Bottega Veneta noticed. The Italian house, founded in Vicenza in 1966 and acquired by the Kering Group in 2001, spent decades as one of fashion's best-kept secrets. Its signature intrecciato weave, the hand-woven leather technique that appears across its bags, shoes, and accessories, became one of the most recognized craft signatures in luxury, without the brand ever putting a visible logo on its products. Bottega Veneta's entire identity is built on the idea that the people who know. It is anti-logo luxury in its purest form, which makes it structurally incompatible with the kind of celebrity partnership that prioritizes mass visibility over cultural precision. RM's appointment as a global ambassador in 2023 was therefore one of the most logically coherent brand-to-person matches in recent luxury history. His public persona is not built on spectacle. It is built on depth, restraint, and a kind of cultural curiosity that aligns almost perfectly with what Bottega Veneta has always represented to its core customer. He doesn't need a logo to signal taste, and neither does the brand. The partnership was announced during a period when Bottega Veneta was solidifying the creative vision of Matthew Blazy, who had taken over as creative director in 2021, following the departure of Daniel Lee. Blazy's approach emphasized craft, materiality, and a return to the foundational values of Italian artisanal production. His collections referenced workwear, classical tailoring, and the kind of quiet confidence that comes from wearing something exceptional without announcing it. RM's aesthetic sensibility mapped onto that vision with unusual precision. He has been photographed in Bottega pieces that don't read as costume, they read as personal choice, which is the highest possible compliment in a brand relationship built on authenticity. His solo album Indigo, released in December 2022, reinforced the alignment further. The album was assembled through collaborations with artists, poets, and musicians across multiple genres and languages, and it debuted at number 14 on the Billboard 200. Critically, it was reviewed not just as a K-pop solo project, but as a genuine artistic document, something that placed RM in a conversation about creativity that extended beyond the music industry into the broader cultural space, where Bottega Veneta's most engaged customers actually live. What makes this partnership structurally different from a standard luxury ambassadorship is the degree to which RM's personal interests generate content that serves the brand without being brand content. Every time he posts about a museum visit, a gallery opening, or an art book he's reading, he is reinforcing the exact cultural positioning that Bottega Veneta wants to occupy without a single product placement required. That kind of organic alignment is something brands spend enormous resources trying to manufacture and almost never fully achieve. The next entry on this list, moves from quiet intellectual luxury into something with a completely different energy. A partnership that became one of the most visually documented celebrity-brand relationships in K-pop history. Number 3. The Dior equation, Jimin times Dior. Park Jimin, the member who consistently ranks at or near the top of individual BTS popularity metrics across multiple global fan survey platforms, has a professional background that separates him from every other member in one specific way. He was accepted into the practical dance department at Busan Arts High School, where he was ranked first in his class before being recruited by Big Hit Entertainment and moving to Seoul as a teenager. He left his hometown, his ranking, and a conventional arts education path to pursue something with no guaranteed outcome inside one of the most brutally competitive industries in South Korea. That biographical detail, the sacrifice made before any success was visible, is the kind of foundation that gives a public persona genuine weight. Dior saw that weight clearly. Christian Dior, the French fashion house founded in 1946 on Avenue Montaigne in Paris, announced Jimin as a global ambassador in January 2023, making him the first Korean artist to hold that title with the house. The announcement itself broke records before any campaign imagery was even released. Posts announcing the partnership generated engagement numbers that Dior's social media accounts had not previously reached, a metric that the fashion industry tracks carefully because it translates directly into the kind of earned media value that advertising budgets attempt to replicate but rarely match. Dior's decision to sign Jimin came at a specific moment in the house's strategic evolution. Under the creative direction of Kim Jones for menswear, a designer who has consistently demonstrated an ability to bridge heritage luxury with contemporary street culture, Dior had been deliberately expanding its cultural footprint into music and youth-facing entertainment. Kim Jones had already built relationships with artists and collaborators from outside the traditional fashion world, including collaborations with figures from the art and music industries that repositioned Dior menswear as a culturally fluid space rather than a purely fashion insider institution. Jimin fit that framework precisely. His solo career had already demonstrated individual commercial power before the Dior announcement. His single Filter, performed as a BTS solo stage, had accumulated hundreds of millions of streams, and his individual fan base, operating under the name Jimin or the broader ARMY designation, had shown a documented capacity to mobilize purchasing behavior at scale. When Jimin is associated with a product, the commercial response is measurable and fast. Dior understood that this wasn't just about aesthetics. It was about activating a consumer base with demonstrated purchasing intent. His debut solo album, Face, released in March 2023, entered the Billboard 200 at number 2 and produced the single Like Crazy, which debuted at number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100, making Jimin the first Korean solo artist to reach that position. That chart achievement arrived 2 months after the Dior ambassadorship was announced, which means the brand had committed to him before his solo commercial ceiling was fully established. That timing reflects either exceptional market intelligence or a level of confidence in his individual trajectory that went beyond existing data. Probably both. His physical presence in Dior campaigns also merits specific attention. Jimin trained in contemporary dance and has a body awareness and movement precision that translates unusually well into the controlled, deliberate aesthetic that high fashion photography requires. Campaign images are not candid. They are constructed environments where the subject's ability to inhabit a specific physical and emotional register determines whether the image works. Jimin's dance training gives him that ability at a professional level, and it shows in every piece of Dior campaign content released under the partnership. The relationship between Jimin and Dior is one of the clearest examples in recent memory of a luxury brand making a forward-looking bet on an individual artist and having that bet pay off in real time, in measurable terms. across multiple commercial metrics simultaneously. What comes next is a partnership that preceded all of these, and in doing so, changed the template that every other luxury house eventually followed. Number 2. The Blueprint. V times Celine. Kim Tae-young, known professionally as V, holds a distinction that is easy to overlook because of how normalized the BTS luxury fashion pipeline eventually became. He was the first BTS member to secure an individual ambassadorship with a major European luxury house. And he did it with a brand that was, at that precise moment, undergoing one of the most closely watched creative transitions in the contemporary fashion industry. That sequencing matters enormously. V didn't follow a template. He was the template. Celine, the French house founded in 1945 by Céline Vipiana as a made-to-measure children's shoe business before evolving into one of Paris's most respected ready-to-wear institutions, announced V as a global brand ambassador in February 2022. The announcement came under the creative direction of Hedi Slimane, who had taken over the house in 2018 and immediately implemented one of the most polarizing creative pivots in recent luxury history, removing the accent from the brand name, discontinuing the beloved handbag lines associated with his predecessor Phoebe Philo, and repositioning Celine around a rock-inflected, youth-facing aesthetic that drew heavily from 1970s California culture and French New Wave cinema. Slimane's vision divided the fashion-critical establishment almost perfectly down the middle. Longtime Celine customers who had built wardrobes around Philo's minimalist, intellectually rigorous designs felt alienated. A younger audience, drawn to the glamour and attitude of Slimane's references, found a new entry point into luxury. V's ambassadorship was a direct instrument of that repositioning strategy. His individual aesthetic had already been extensively documented by the time the Celine deal was announced. He had spoken publicly about his interest in vintage clothing, art, and specifically about his admiration for the work of artists like Van Gogh and Picasso. He collects art. He has been photographed visiting galleries and museums across multiple countries, not as scheduled press activity, but as personal practice, a behavioral pattern that mirrors RM's, but with a more overtly sensory and emotional orientation, rather than an intellectual one. His fashion choices in personal contexts, airport looks, off-duty appearances captured by media consistently demonstrated a sophistication that industry observers noted was not being managed by a styling team following brand directives. It looked like personal conviction, which is the rarest and most valuable quality a brand ambassador can possess. The commercial impact of the V-Celine partnership was immediate and documented. Products associated with V-specific bags, shoes, and clothing items featured in campaign content or worn by him in public appearances sold out in hours across multiple markets. The phenomenon became known within the industry as the V effect, a term used to describe the demonstrable purchasing acceleration that occurs when he is visibly associated with a specific product. Retailers and brand inventory managers began accounting for this pattern in their stock planning, which is an extraordinary operational acknowledgement of a single individual's commercial influence. His solo single, Christmas Tree, released as the soundtrack for the Korean drama Our Beloved Summer in December 2021, had already demonstrated his individual commercial reach before the Celine announcement, charting in multiple countries and accumulating streaming numbers that most solo artists build over months in a matter of days. His full solo album, Layover, released in September 2023, debuted at number 2 on the Billboard 200 and showcased a jazz and soul-influenced sound that reinforced his reputation as an artist with genuinely eclectic and developed musical taste. The album's aesthetic cohesion, its visual identity, its sonic palette, its promotional imagery aligned so naturally with the Celine world that the partnership felt less like a brand deal and more like two creative entities that had arrived at the same place from different directions. V and Celine, established the proof of concept that every subsequent BTS luxury partnership was measured against. The question that remains is, which member and which brand earned the number one position, and why that particular combination carries more structural significance than anything else on this list. Number 1. The Global Reset, Jungkook times Calvin Klein. Jungkook, the youngest member of BTS, referred to within the group and its fanbase as the maknae, the Korean term for the youngest in a group hierarchy, was recruited by Big Hit Entertainment at the age of 13 after auditioning for the label during a regional talent search in Busan. He turned down offers from multiple other agencies to sign with Big Hit, a company that at the time had no significant commercial track record and no guarantee of producing anything that would survive the brutally competitive Korean idol industry. He was a child making a high-stakes decision based on instinct, and that decision eventually made him one of the most recognizable solo artists on the planet. Calvin Klein's decision to sign Jungkook as a global ambassador in 2023 was, on the surface, a straightforward celebrity partnership between a legacy American fashion brand and a globally recognized K-pop star. Underneath that surface, it was something considerably more significant, a deliberate act of brand resurrection by a company that had spent years struggling to recapture the cultural dominance it had built in the 1980s and 1990s. Calvin Klein. Founded by designer Calvin Klein and business partner Barry Schwartz in New York in 1968, defined American fashion for 2 decades through a combination of minimalist design and provocative advertising. Its campaigns featuring Brooke Shields in 1980 and later Kate Moss and Mark Wahlberg in the early 1990s set the template for what fashion advertising could be: sexually charged, visually stripped down, and culturally impossible to ignore. Those campaigns didn't just sell jeans and underwear. They generated genuine public controversy, congressional attention, and the kind of earned media that transformed a clothing brand into a cultural institution. By the mid-2010s, however, Calvin Klein had lost much of that cultural momentum. A failed attempt to reposition the brand under the creative direction of Raf Simons, who joined in 2016 and departed abruptly in 2018 after his vision proved commercially incompatible with parent company PVH's financial expectations, left the brand without a coherent creative identity. At exactly the moment the fashion industry was accelerating its shift toward digital-first, celebrity-driven marketing. The brand needed a reset that was both commercially immediate and culturally credible. Jungkook delivered both simultaneously, and the numbers that followed were not subtle. When Calvin Klein released its campaign imagery featuring Jungkook in March 2023, the response was measurable within hours. The campaign posts became some of the most engaged content in Calvin Klein's entire social media history across platforms. The brand's Instagram following grew at an accelerated rate in the days following the campaign launch. Specific underwear products featured in the campaign sold out across multiple markets with a speed that the brand's inventory systems were reportedly not fully prepared for. The Jungkook effect on Calvin Klein's e-commerce performance became a documented commercial event, not an anecdotal observation. What made the partnership structurally more significant than a standard celebrity sales bump was its geographic reach. Calvin Klein's core markets had historically been concentrated in North America and Western Europe. Jungkook's fanbase is genuinely global in a way that very few individual artists can claim, with documented, commercially active audiences across Southeast Asia, East Asia, South Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East. In addition to the Western markets, where Calvin Klein already had infrastructure, his ambassadorship functioned as a market expansion tool, introducing the brand to purchasing demographics in regions where it had limited organic penetration. His solo single 7, released in July 2023, collaboration with producer Andrew Watt, and featuring Lato, debuted at #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and became the fastest solo song by a Korean artist to reach 1 billion streams on Spotify. That commercial achievement arrived in the same year as the Calvin Klein partnership, creating a period in which Jungkook's individual commercial footprint was expanding across music and fashion simultaneously, two industries reinforcing each other's metrics in real time. He enlisted for mandatory military service in December 2023, assigned to a frontline unit with an expected discharge in 2025. Calvin Klein maintained the partnership through his service period, a decision that mirrors Puma's approach with Suga and signals the same institutional confidence in long-term brand alignment over short-term visibility cycles. The reason Jungkook and Calvin Klein sit at #1 on this list is not simply because the commercial numbers were large, though they were. It is because the partnership represented something structurally different from the luxury house ambassadorships that defined most of the other entries. Those partnerships placed BTS members inside existing cultural institutions with established prestige frameworks. The Calvin Klein deal asked a different question entirely. Could a single artist's individual cultural gravity be strong enough to reactivate a legacy brand that had lost its edge in multiple markets across multiple demographics at the same time? The answer, documented in sales data, social metrics, and brand valuation reports, was an unambiguous yes. That is why it leads this list. Not because of the glamour, because of the scale of what actually changed.